I choose him. The healer's defiant vow. Chapter 1. The temple and the burden. The air inside the Moonstone Temple was cold and heavy, a deceptive chill that held no promise of sanctuary. It was the unnatural cold of desperation, clinging to Seraphina like the thick, embroidered white robes of her sacred office. She was a revered figure, known throughout the realm as the most potent of the echo-touched healers. The title was gilded, but the reality was torment. Seraphina possessed the power to mend any wound and diagnose any illness. But the curse was the price. The instant her skin touched the afflicted, her mind was violently flooded with their physical pain and, most unbearably, the final crushing terror of their dying thoughts. Her gift was a constant, shattering intimacy with suffering. She endured this relentless mental barrage only because the survival of her people demanded it. Today, her life was meant to be another, deeper sacrifice. Seraphina stood before the main altar, facing Lord Valerius, Duke of the Iron Marshes. He was an imposing figure in polished obsidian armor, possessing a terrifying political and military power that eclipsed the waning authority of the temple elders. His gaze on her was possessive, assessing a valuable piece of property. The Duke provides security, he had openly stated, his voice a gravelly boast. The healer provides efficiency. This union is advantageous and final. The elders, desperate for the Duke's military protection, had agreed. They whispered about Seraphine's unruly power, believing that harnessing her to such a powerful man was the only way to contain her. They were forcing her into a political marriage, chaining her independence to a man whose very ambition reeked of blood. Valerius offered his hand across the altar stone, his heavy signet ring gleaming in the candlelight. This gesture, the joining of hands, was the signal for the elders to begin the binding chant. Seraphina looked at his cold, waiting eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable, for the moment her echo touch would fire, forcing her to see the true corruption of the man she was about to be bound to forever. She knew what she would find. She just prayed she had the strength to survive the vision. She closed her eyes, accepting the end of her freedom, preparing to feel the terrible, cold core of Lord Valerius. Chapter 2. The ash wraith and the echo of cruelty, the fire of betrayal, the binding chant began. Low and monotonous, echoing off the ancient stone walls. The elders, relieved the decision was made, focused on the ritual sealing Seraphine's fate. Valerius's damp, cold fingers closed over her own to cement the union. The instant his skin pressed against hers, the expected rush of the echo touch was unlike anything Seraphina had ever experienced. It was not pain, but a deep, overwhelming cold knowledge, a raw, terrifying window into his soul. She was suddenly him, standing on a blood-slicked, snow-covered battlefield. Through his eyes, she watched his own wounded guardsmen who had bled for him call out for aid. But Valerius saw not loyalty, but inconvenience. In the flash of that chilling memory, Seraphina felt the Duke's silent, cruel command, abandon them. They are weak. Dead men require no resources. She felt his cold satisfaction as he rode away, leaving his loyal soldiers to be butchered. Valerius was not merely ambitious. He was a viper, willing to sacrifice any life for marginal gain. Seraphina ripped her hand away. A choked gasp tearing from her throat. The bitter taste of his pure treachery sickening her. Chaos in the prisoner. Before Valerius could even register her defiance, the world tilted. A sound like a mountain splitting erupted from outside, and a monstrous creature, an ash wraith, a gargantuan thing of shadow and sharp bone, slammed into the temple's eastern wall. Stone exploded inward, showering the hall with dust, debris, and the screams of the wounded. Valerius, far from a chivalrous savior, immediately grabbed Seraphina and shoved her behind his armored bulk. "Stay there, tool. You will not risk your face. Your value is intact, understood?" He was using her, the most valuable asset he was about to acquire, as a meat shield, But Seraphina was no longer listening to him. Her eyes, frantic and wide, scanned the hall and found the one fixed point in the chaos, the infamous, nameless shadow prisoner, chained to a massive granite pillar near the vault entrance. He was a silent, monstrous figure cloaked in heavy shadows. The massive iron chains did not merely bind him. They were symbols of the terrible, dark power he was rumored to possess. While priests and guards fought the ash wraith, the shadow prisoner simply sat unmoving, radiating an absolute, profound cold silence that was terrifyingly potent. Valeria's swearing under his breath began dragging Seraphina toward the shadow prisoner's pillar, seeking its massive granite protection. No. The sound tore from Seraphine's chest, raw and absolute. The true monster was not chained. He was dragging her by the arm, the defiant vow Seraphina, wrenched free of Valerius's grasp and sprinted toward the shadow prisoner. She stopped directly before the chained giant, her pristine white robes a glaring contrast to his dark, monstrous shadow. Her choice was irrational, suicidal, but pure. She would rather be bound to the terrifying unknown than the calculated, intimate cruelty she had just witnessed in Valerius's mind. She locked eyes with the shadow where his face should have been. "I choose him," she declared, her voice ringing with a conviction that silenced the chaos. "I will not marry a butcher. I will take the shadow prisoner as my mate. I will heal his curse or die trying." Valeriers roared in outrage, but the elders were already moving, their faces a mixture of fury and fearful relief. Her vow, born of desperate defiance, was legally binding. They could now rid themselves of the rebellious echo-touched healer and the volatile monster in one move. Hours later, Seraphina was pushed onto a rickety fishing boat, the shadow prisoner now known to her by the single name he provided. Caspian shuffling beside her, his chains heavy, the boat turned its prow toward the distant, fog-shrouded rocks of the Isle of Whispers, the desolate, cursed exile from which no one had ever returned. She had chosen the path of the monster over the path of the tyrant. Her sacrifice was complete. Chapter 3. Banishment to the Isle of Whispers, bound to the abyss. The journey was a punishment unto itself. They were transported on a small, battered fishing vessel, pushed through churning, slate-gray waters toward the horizon's perpetual fog. The temple elders had spared no expense in ensuring the journey was humiliatingly uncomfortable and absolutely final. Caspian, the shadow prisoner, was secured to the mast. The massive iron chains that had bound him in the temple now bolted to the timber. The chains were thick as a warrior's forearm, their cold weight an inescapable presence. He remained absolutely silent, his huge frame radiating the same unsettling stillness Seraphina had witnessed during the attack. The shadows of his hood were deep, revealing nothing of his face or eyes, only the occasional glimpse of massive, scarred hands. Seraphina sat huddled on a coil of rope, watching him. Her anger toward Valerius, which had fueled her defiant vow, had burned down, leaving only the cold ash of fear and exhaustion. She had chosen freedom from one monster by binding herself to a literal legend of terror. "Caspian," she whispered once, hours into the journey. "Why did you give them a name?" His voice, when it came, was a low rumble against the sound of the waves. "It is preferable to being called shadow prisoner for eternity. It is less accurate." The admission was startling in its cynicism. Seraphina realized he was not an unthinking brute. He was intelligent, aware, and perhaps even possessed of a dark, weary humor about the land of no return. As they sailed deeper into the isolated stretch of ocean, the atmosphere grew heavy, chilled by a natural cold. Finally, the Isle of Whispers emerged from the fog. It was not an island so much as a mass of sharp, black basalt that clawed at the sky. Gnarled, petrified trees grew impossibly from the rock, and the shoreline was a graveyard of shattered shipwrecks and bone. It looked, Seraphina thought, exactly like the end of the world. The sailors dumped their meager supplies, a few sacks of dry rations, a coil of rope, and a flint starter onto the rocks, and immediately cast off. Refusing to linger, the last thing Seraphina heard before the fog swallowed the boat was the frantic, superstitious chanting of the crew. She was alone with the monster. Seraphina found a shallow sea cave, sheltered enough from the biting wind, and began the arduous task of dragging their goods toward it. She was halfway through the process when Caspian shuffled toward her. The chains allowed only the shortest, most clumsy steps, and the effort was visibly taxing. The anchor bolt, he rasped, gesturing to the massive, rusted iron ring embedded in the cave's floor. Chain me there. He was submitting to his confinement, accepting the exile. Seraphine's hands trembled as she lifted the heavy final length of chain. The metal was frigid. She secured him to the anchor bolt, completing her part in his imprisonment. The first quiet, she started a small fire, the weak flames offering more psychological comfort than actual warmth. As the smoke curled around the damp rock, Seraphina finally sat, her back against the cave wall, and looked at the shadow prisoner. He was silent, a monumental shadow against the flickering light, radiating a palpable sense of doom. This was her home now. This was her mate Dot. She realized the absolute finality of her choice. She had not only sacrificed her future, but her comfort. She had traded the gilded cage of a duke for the raw, brutal reality of a cursed island and a terrifying chain giant Dot. Yet, despite the terror, a strange realization settled over her. She was alive, and for the first time in years, she felt free. The constant noise of political scheming, elder demands, and Valeria's sneering presence was gone. "I need to attempt the healing now," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need to know the true nature of your shadow curse." She braced herself, anticipating the agony, the visions, the echoes of his monstrous past. It was time to find out if she had chosen the devil or salvation. Chapter 4. The stillness of the shadow, the price of contact, the small fire. Seraphina had coaxed from the damp moss, offered meager warmth, but a stark silhouette of the man she was bound to. Caspian sat motionless, the chains connecting him to the bedrock, waiting for her. She had tried to sleep, but the unspoken terror of their situation and the knowledge of the agonizing torment her echo touch was about to unleash kept her rigid. She knew the rules of her curse. The greater the injury or internal corruption, the more destructive the psychic recoil. To touch a man whose reputation was built on carnage, whose chains suggested monstrous darkness, was likely to break her mind completely. Seraphina gathered her courage, kneeling before him. "I have to try," she stated, her voice trembling slightly. "If I am to break your shadow curse, I need to know what it is." Caspian finally tilted his head, the deep shadow of his hood shifting just enough to reveal a flicker of something she couldn't name, perhaps curiosity, perhaps fatalism. "Do what you must, healer," he rumbled. Dot. She reached out, her hand hesitant, preparing for the crushing wave of pain, the shrieks of his victims, the final thoughts of darkness. She braced her psychic walls, ready to sacrifice her peace, perhaps her sanity, to honor her defiant vow. Her fingers, cold from the night air, brushed against the exposed skin of his hand. Resting on the iron chains, the shock of absolute quiet, the expected agony never came. Instead of a tidal wave of pain, Seraphina felt a profound, absolute stillness. It was shocking in its intensity, a silence so complete that it felt louder than any scream. Her echo touch, the uncontrollable, cursed ability that constantly vibrated with the suffering of the world, found nothing. It was like casting a net into the deepest ocean trenches and finding only a perfect, soundless void. There were no dying thoughts, no physical aches, no echoes of malice, and no fragments of guilt. There was only a profound, deep comfort. For the first time since her childhood, the constant, maddening roar of other suffering was muted. She felt utterly and completely quiet. She snatched her hand back, gasping, her own breath loud in the sudden silence of her mind. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of pain, but of bewildered relief. A unique enigma Caspian shifted, the grinding of his chains startling her. He looked genuinely surprised. "What is it?" he demanded, the deep rumble in his voice laced with genuine urgency. "Did the curse retaliate?" Seraphina shook her head, unable to articulate the staggering truth. "No, I felt nothing. It didn't penetrate. When I touch any living soul, I feel their history, their pain. With Lord Valeria's, I felt pure, icy cruelty." Her gaze lifted to the shadows of his face. "But with you, Caspian, I felt peace." She looked at the shadow prisoner, truly seeing the monstrous figure as an enigma, not a beast. "It is the first silence I have ever known. It is the first time the curse has ever been quiet." His stoic mask seemed to crack. A flash of something unreadable, perhaps suspicion, perhaps grudging respect crossing the exposed lower half of his face. "My curse, as you call it, is absolute shadow," he stated, his voice flat. "It is meant to terrify and repel. It should have torn your mind apart." "It gave my mind rest," Seraphina countered, gripping her trembling hands. The truth was terrifying. The man rumored to be the source of all evil, whose curse terrified the entire kingdom, was the only person in the world whose presence brought Seraphina comfort. She had chosen him out of spite, but now a profound and unique connection had been forged in the stillness of the monster. Chapter 3. Banishment to the Isle of Whispers, bound to the abyss. The journey was a punishment unto itself. They were transported on a small, battered fishing vessel, pushed through churning, slate-gray waters toward the horizon's perpetual fog. The temple elders had spared no expense in ensuring the journey was humiliatingly uncomfortable and absolutely final. Caspian, the shadow prisoner, was secured to the mast. The massive iron chains that had bound him in the temple now bolted to the timber. The chains were thick as a warrior's forearm, their cold weight an inescapable presence. He remained absolutely silent, his huge frame radiating the same unsettling stillness Seraphina had witnessed during the attack. The shadows of his hood were deep, revealing nothing of his face or eyes, only the occasional glimpse of massive, scarred hands. Seraphina sat huddled on a coil of rope, watching him. Her anger toward Valerius, which had fueled her defiant vow, had burned down, leaving only the cold ash of fear and exhaustion. She had chosen freedom from one monster by binding herself to a literal legend of terror. "Caspian," she whispered once, hours into the journey. "Why did you give them a name?" His voice, when it came, was a low rumble against the sound of the waves. "It is preferable to being called shadow prisoner for eternity. It is less accurate." The admission was startling in its cynicism. Seraphina realized he was not an unthinking brute. He was intelligent, aware, and perhaps even possessed of a dark, weary humor about the land of no return. As they sailed deeper into the isolated stretch of ocean, the atmosphere grew heavy, chilled by a natural cold. Finally, the Isle of Whispers emerged from the fog. It was not an island so much as a mass of sharp, black basalt that clawed at the sky. Gnarled, petrified trees grew impossibly from the rock, and the shoreline was a graveyard of shattered shipwrecks and bone. It looked, Seraphina thought, exactly like the end of the world. The sailors dumped their meager supplies, a few sacks of dry rations, a coil of rope, and a flint starter onto the rocks, and immediately cast off. Refusing to linger, the last thing Seraphina heard before the fog swallowed the boat was the frantic, superstitious chanting of the crew. She was alone with the monster. Seraphina found a shallow sea cave, sheltered enough from the biting wind, and began the arduous task of dragging their goods toward it. She was halfway through the process when Caspian shuffled toward her. The chains allowed only the shortest, most clumsy steps, and the effort was visibly taxing. The anchor bolt, he rasped, gesturing to the massive, rusted iron ring embedded in the cave's floor. Chain me there. He was submitting to his confinement, accepting the exile. Seraphine's hands trembled as she lifted the heavy final length of chain. The metal was frigid. She secured him to the anchor bolt. Completing her part in his imprisonment, the first quiet, she started a small fire, the weak flames offering more psychological comfort than actual warmth. As the smoke curled around the damp rock, Seraphina finally sat, her back against the cave wall, and looked at the shadow prisoner. He was silent, a monumental shadow against the flickering light, radiating a palpable sense of doom. This was her home now. This was her mate. She realized the absolute finality of her choice. She had not only sacrificed her future, but her comfort. She had traded the gilded cage of a duke for the raw, brutal reality of a cursed island and a terrifying chain giant. Yet, despite the terror, a strange realization settled over her. She was alive, and for the first time in years, she felt free. The constant noise of political scheming, elder demands, and Valeria's sneering presence was gone. I need to attempt the healing now, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I need to know the true nature of your shadow curse. She braced herself, anticipating the agony, the visions, the echoes of his monstrous past. It was time to find out if she had chosen the devil or salvation. Chapter 4. The stillness of the shadow, the price of contact, the small fire. Seraphina had coaxed from the damp moss, offered meager warmth, but a stark silhouette of the man she was bound to. Caspian sat motionless, the chains connecting him to the bedrock, waiting for her. She had tried to sleep, but the unspoken terror of their situation and the knowledge of the agonizing torment her echo touch was about to unleash kept her rigid. She knew the rules of her curse. The greater the injury or internal corruption, the more destructive the psychic recoil. To touch a man whose reputation was built on carnage, whose chains suggested monstrous darkness, was likely to break her mind completely. Seraphina gathered her courage, kneeling before him. I have to try, she stated, her voice trembling slightly. If I am to break your shadow curse, I need to know what it is. Caspian finally tilted his head, the deep shadow of his hood shifting just enough to reveal a flicker of something she couldn't name, perhaps curiosity, perhaps fatalism. Do what you must, healer, he rumbled. She reached out, her hand hesitant, preparing for the crushing wave of pain, the shrieks of his victims, the final thoughts of darkness. She braced her psychic walls, ready to sacrifice her peace, perhaps her sanity, to honor her defiant vow. Her fingers, cold from the night air, brushed against the exposed skin of his hand. Resting on the iron chains, the shock of absolute quiet, the expected agony never came. Instead of a tidal wave of pain, Seraphina felt a profound, absolute stillness. It was shocking in its intensity, a silence so complete that it felt louder than any scream. Her echo touch, the uncontrollable, cursed ability that constantly vibrated with the suffering of the world, found nothing. It was like casting a net into the deepest ocean trenches and finding only a perfect, soundless void. There were no dying thoughts, no physical aches, no echoes of malice, and no fragments of guilt. There was only a profound, deep comfort. For the first time since her childhood, the constant, maddening roar of other suffering was muted. She felt utterly and completely quiet. She snatched her hand back, gasping, her own breath loud in the sudden silence of her mind. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of pain, but of bewildered relief. A unique enigma. Caspian shifted, the grinding of his chains startling her. He looked genuinely surprised. What is it? He demanded, the deep rumble in his voice laced with genuine urgency. Did the curse retaliate? Seraphina shook her head, unable to articulate the staggering truth. No, I felt nothing. It didn't penetrate. When I touch any living soul, I feel their history, their pain. With Lord Valeria's, I felt pure, icy cruelty. Her gaze lifted to the shadows of his face. But with you, Caspian, I felt peace. She looked at the shadow prisoner, truly seeing the monstrous figure as an enigma, not a beast. It is the first silence I have ever known. It is the first time the curse has ever been quiet. His stoic mask seemed to crack. A flash of something unreadable, perhaps suspicion. Perhaps grudging respect crossing the exposed lower half of his face. My curse, as you call it, is absolute shadow, he stated, his voice flat. It is meant to terrify and repel. It should have torn your mind apart. It gave my mind rest, Seraphina countered, gripping her trembling hands. The truth was terrifying. The man rumored to be the source of all evil, whose curse terrified the entire kingdom, was the only person in the world whose presence brought Seraphina comfort. She had chosen him out of spite, but now a profound and unique connection had been forged in the stillness of the monster. In the stillness of the monster. Chapter 7. Scars and Symmetry. The comfort of the cold Seraphina no longer slept on the far side of the cave. She found herself habitually setting the small, struggling fire closer to Caspian's central pillar. The cold air he projected, the physical manifestation of his shadow curse, was the only thing that could truly cut through the residual noise of the world and grant her mind relief. She was addicted to the stillness, prioritizing the unique comfort of his presence over physical warmth. One evening, after eating a meager supper of boiled mussels, Seraphina watched the shadows dance across his massive, chained frame. She decided to break the silence, not with a question about his past, but with a painful truth about her own. When I touched you that first day, she began, keeping her voice low, and I felt nothing. It was the greatest kindness anyone has ever shown me. Caspian shifted, his heavy chains scraping softly. I doubt that, healer. My gift is my torment, she continued, looking down at her hands, the instruments of her curse. The echo touch doesn't just read pain. It forces me to feel the dying thoughts of everyone I heal. The sheer volume of terror, guilt, and regret. It is never ending. I am never alone. The temple elders saw my power, but they feared my weakness. They believed the constant influx of death would eventually shatter my mind, turning me into a volatile weapon. She looked up, meeting the shadows of his gaze. You, the monster of legend, the cursed prisoner, are the only being whose touch grants me silence. Your curse, or whatever binds you, perfectly cancels mine. That is why I chose you over Valerius. He is a cage of cruelty. You are a sanctuary of peace. The symbiotic truth Caspian remained still for a long moment, absorbing her confession. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual, a low murmur that barely rose above the crackle of the fire. I understand isolation. Seraphina, he said, using her name with a rare, gentle emphasis that sent a shiver down her spine. The thing that binds me is meant to instill absolute fear, to ensure distance. I have spent my life ensuring that no one ever comes close enough to see the truth behind the shadow. You are the first soul who willingly chose proximity, who saw the shadows and walked toward them. He tapped a finger against the thick, cold iron of his wrist cuff. You assume these chains are necessary for restraint. They are also symbolic, a boundary. I am choosing this place, choosing this silence with you. The truth of his statement hit her with a sudden force. He was choosing to stay chained to her. A symbiotic relationship, Seraphina murmured, recalling his earlier clinical description of their partnership. A necessity, Caspian agreed, his tone darkening slightly. You give me quiet. I give you protection. He then reached out, his immense, shadowed hand carefully retrieving a piece of driftwood she had dropped moments earlier. He ran a precise thumb over the smooth grain. But it is more than just survival now, isn't it, healer? The breaking point, the question hung heavy in the damp air. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged the simmering emotional reality that transcended mere partnership. Seraphine's gaze dropped to his hands, the brutal power and the surprising tenderness. She knew this was a breaking point. She was physically dependent on the stillness and emotionally dependent on his quiet protection. And the undeniable attraction, born of shared risk and unique connection, was blazing. She pushed herself up and slowly approached him, her hands instinctively reaching for the massive iron links of his chest chain. "The Duke said I was a tool," she whispered, her voice husky. "The temple said I was unstable. You treat me like a partner and you give me peace." She leaned in, her forehead resting against the cold iron of his chains, just inches from the shadow of his face. "I've chosen the monster, Caspian, and I don't regret it." She waited for the agony of the echo touch, the betrayal, the regret, the fear she expected her choice to trigger in him. She waited for him to recoil from the sheer vulnerability she was displaying instead. His massive, scarred hand reached out from the shadow and gently, carefully rested on the back of her head, anchoring her there against the cold metal. "Then live with your terrible choice. Seraphina," he breathed, his voice a low, rough comfort, "and never leave the light of my shadow." The air between them was electric, thick with unspoken desire and the profound, silent understanding of two cursed souls finally finding their singular solace in each other. Chapter 8, The Anchor of the Heart and Unconventional Paradise. 3 months passed on the Isle of Whispers, and the brutal reality of the exile had transformed into a strange, unconventional serenity. Seraphina and Caspian had settled into a silent language of shared survival. He would note the dangerous tides with a grunt. She would leave the freshest spring water closest to his chains. Seraphina no longer saw the shadow prisoner. She saw Caspian, the man with the precise hands, the low, comforting rumble of a voice, and the absolute stillness that was her mind's saving grace. Her fear was completely gone, replaced by an emotional reliance so profound it eclipsed her own identity. She had spent her life cursed, constantly tormented by the thoughts of others. Now, wrapped in the cold, profound silence of Caspian's presence, she was finally healing. She was learning who she was when she wasn't bombarded by the echoes of death and suffering. It was no longer just survival, or a symbiotic partnership based on convenience. She was desperately, undeniably in love with this monster who was simultaneously her jailer and her sanctuary. The undeniable, pulpit emotional dependence had begun to manifest as a fierce, magnetic physical desire. Their touches were rare, usually fleeting, and always electric. A careful brush of hands when tending the fire, a moment of contact when he moved, testing the limits of his chains. Each time, the contact triggered not her echo touch, but an intense, localized warmth that radiated through the core of her being. One cold afternoon, Seraphina was pouching a tear in the cloak he had given her. She sat near his pillar, absorbed in her task. Caspian, who had been meditating in his usual silent stoicism, spoke without warning. "Do you ever regret the vow?" he asked, his voice rough. Not the rejection of Valerius, but the binding to the monster. Seraphina paused, the needle frozen in the thick wool. She didn't have to use her echo touch to know the question was rooted in a deep, personal vulnerability. "I regret the circumstance," she said softly, meeting the shadow of his eyes. "I regret the pain that brought us here. But no, I chose the truth of you over the lie of him. You have given me a life free of the screams. You are the only man in this world I can truly hear myself think beside." She moved closer, placing her hand gently on the heavy iron chain that connected his wrist to his chest. I chose the monster, she whispered, but I love the man. A glimpse of the King Caspian did not recoil. Instead, his free hand, the one not currently chained, moved with startling speed, his fingers capturing her chin, forcing her to look up. The shadows of his hood were thick, but Seraphina saw the muscle in his jaw clench, and his breath hitched. The air between them tightened unbearably with unspoken desire. "You speak a dangerous loyalty, healer," he murmured, his thumb brushing her lip. "I am not merely a chained monster. I am a king's subject, exiled for sedition. My secrets are deep, and they are not safe." This was the most Seraphina had ever heard him confess to the outside world, and the gravity of his words hung heavy in the air. Before she could press him, before the undeniable desire could force a kiss, he retracted his hand sharply, breaking the magnetic tension. "The bond between us," he stated, his voice now flat, "must remain a fortress. Do not allow the world to corrupt what you have found here." The intrusion that night, the perfect peace they had forged, was abruptly broken. Seraphina, asleep in her cocoon of warmth and stillness, was startled awake by the sound of waves lapping a strange vessel. She looked outside the cave to see a small, heavily cloaked skiff dock silently on the rocks. Two figures, dressed in the heavy oilskins of deep-sea fishermen, were quickly unloading several crates near the shoreline. Seraphine's echo touch flared to life as they passed close to the cave. She braced herself for the fishermen's thoughts, their hunger, their exhaustion, but was met with the same profound, absolute stillness she only felt from Caspian. These men, too, were mysteriously shielded. They deposited the crates and, with a curt, barely audible signal, left a small, tightly wrapped, waterproof parcel in the sand before disappearing into the fog. Seraphina watched the ship vanish. The peace of their sanctuary was shattered. The outside world had found the Isle of Whispers, and these visitors were connected to Caspian, the silent king's subject, in a way that defied her most powerful curse. Chapter 9. The mysterious courier, the price of secrecy. The shock of the intrusion was potent enough to break the months of sanctuary Seraphina had found. She waited until the fog had completely swallowed the strange skiff before retrieving the small, waterproof parcel left in the sand dot. It was sealed with cold wax bearing a sophisticated, unfamiliar crest, a stylized serpent coiled around an ash tree, not the rough insignia of a fisherman or common merchant. This was no ordinary supply drop. Seraphina moved back into the cave and tossed the parcel onto the floor near Caspian's chained pillar. She no longer felt the gentle peace of his presence, only the heat of building resentment. "Your allies," she stated, her voice sharp with accusation. "They came and went like ghosts. And when they passed, I felt nothing. No pain, no thoughts, no echo touch. Just that same cold, absolute stillness that you carry." Caspian remained unmoving, his immense form absorbing the firelight. He reached out and retrieved the parcel with a gentle precision that belied his massive hands. The soft rustle of the parchment allowed intrusion in their quiet world. "They are necessary," he confirmed. Not looking at her. Necessary for what? Seraphina demanded, stepping closer. "For a simple exile? Or for a man whose sedition is part of a larger conspiracy?" She pointed a trembling finger at the crest. "That seal is not from a peasant's pocket. You told me your chains were symbolic restraint. Was your entire identity, the shadow prisoner, the monster, just another symbol?" The fracturing trust Caspian's silence was a heavy, impenetrable shield. He carefully broke the seal, unfolded the parchment, and scanned the coded lines of writing. The tension emanating from him was palpable, a complex mix of urgency, fear, and reluctant decision. "The stillness you feel from them is intentional," Caspian finally said, his voice flat. "It is an enchantment, a powerful glamour placed upon those who dare to approach this cursed place. It is designed to mimic the effect of the shadow curse to repel and protect. They are merely couriers, Seraphina. They are not the threat. You are the threat. She cried, the truth of his deception overriding her need for quiet. You knew what my curse was, and yet you built our entire relationship on your silence and my weakness. You allowed me to fall in love with a man who was using his isolation as a convenient mask. The accusation struck him with physical force. His massive shoulders shifted, and the chains ground against the rock. He did not deny it. I needed to know, he grated out, his voice rough with something that sounded like pain. I needed to know if you were capable of looking past the shadow and choosing compassion. I needed to know if you would choose the man beneath the monster, even if you feared the beast above. He crumpled the message in his hand. You did choose compassion. You chose me. I swore that when you made that choice, I would never allow you harm. A player in the great game, his confession was honest, but it didn't heal the sudden, widening rift between them. Seraphina realized she was not bound to a simple monster, but to a highly organized, political player with deep-reaching allies and a vital role in the fate of the kingdom. What do the couriers bring, Caspian? She insisted, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. What game are you truly playing here? Caspian did not answer. Instead, he rose slowly to his full, immense height, the iron chains scraping their ominous warning against the rock. He walked to the back of the cave, where the shadows deepened into a secondary alcove, a place Seraphina had never ventured. The world outside is collapsing, healer, he stated, his back to her. The quiet we have built here cannot last. What you need to focus on is surviving the inevitable storm that is coming to this shore. He disappeared into the shadows of the alcove. Seraphina heard the faint sound of shifting stone, then a click as if a door had closed. Leaving her utterly alone in the firelit cave, the shadow prisoner had secrets deeper than his curse. And Seraphina knew with chilling certainty that the peace of their exile was over. She was no longer just his companion. She was his unsuspecting ally in a vast and dangerous royal conspiracy. Chapter 10. Whispers of the King. The crumpled map. The cold silence that Caspian left behind was worse than any pain Seraphina had ever felt. It was a calculated emptiness, a physical manifestation of his betrayal. He had offered her respite, peace, and even love, all while operating as a key player in a high-stakes conspiracy. Seraphina moved to the spot where Caspian had stood, ignoring the deep ache in her heart. The stone alcove he had retreated into was seamless, a magically concealed passage, confirming that the shadow prisoner was anything but helpless. She spotted the object of her current fury, the crumpled, sealed piece of parchment he had discarded before entering the secret passage. Despite the immediate need for emotional confrontation, Seraphina knew she needed information more than vengeance. Straightening the paper, she examined the cryptic writing. It was a sophisticated substitution cipher, clearly designed for military or royal use. However, Seraphina was a temple healer, trained from childhood in archaic texts and medicinal sigils. She recognized the pattern, a minor variant of the Ash Shadow cipher, an ancient code used by the Crown centuries ago to protect sensitive lineage records, decoding the crisis working quickly and efficiently, the focus providing a temporary shield from her emotional turmoil. Seraphina began transcribing the message onto a piece of charcoal-stained driftwood dot as the lines of code gave way to recognizable words. The terrifying truth of the outside world snapped into focus: : The sun is shadowed. Regent Valerius holds the council in iron. The king remains silent in the high tower. He suspects the Glamour is failing. Reinforcements mobilized. We need the heir now. The kingdom awaits the Shadow Prince, the only one who bears the blood and the power to break the chain and raise the loyal legions. Seraphina dropped the charcoal. The raw, unfiltered meaning of the message resonated with a chilling clarity that transcended the silence of her echo touched Regent Valerius. The ruthless Duke had seized control, confirming Seraphine's initial instinct about his treachery. The king remained silent. The true ruler was imprisoned, or worse, and then the final, undeniable truth, the reference to the exiled hope, the one who could break the chains and save the realm, the Shadow Prince, the full revelation Seraphina's mind raced, connecting the fragments she had long ignored. The myth of the Shadow Prince, a legendary heir, possessed a frightening power, long believed dead or exiled for his volatile gift. Caspian's appearance, the immense power, the self-imposed chains, the shadow curse that instilled fear and demanded distance. Caspian's admission, I am a king's subject, exiled for sedition. The shadow curse was not a curse. It was a sophisticated, self-imposed glamour, a powerful magical disguise designed to amplify fear and hide a magnificent royal identity. The chilling significance of the absolute stillness she felt when they touched flooded her. It was not the absence of a soul. It was the mark of a true mate, her echo touch, the psychic tool designed to sense pain and betrayal, was rendered powerless by his presence because his inner self, his soul, was perfectly aligned with hers, making her the single exception to his solitude. His truth was her comfort. Caspian had not been testing her compassion for a monster. He had been testing her ability to love the man beneath the prince, the man whose true identity required hiding behind an impenetrable wall of fear, the true face of the Seraphinas. Fury over the deception warred with the overwhelming realization of the sacrifice he had made. He had chosen exile, chains, and the terrifying reputation of a monster, all to find someone who would look at him and choose him, defects and all. Without the influence of his title or his terrible power, she, the cursed healer, had stumbled into the hidden test of the exiled Crown Prince. She crumpled the decoded note in her hand. The fate of the Sunstone Kingdom now rested on the man currently concealed behind the secret door in her cave. Just as the sun began to set, turning the gray mist to sudden bloody orange, the stone door of the alcove clicked softly. Caspian, still cloaked, still shadowed, still the monstrous prisoner, emerged, his expression guarded. Seraphina stood, facing him across the small fire, the decoded truth burning in her hand. She said nothing. The air was thick with the imminent reckoning, the moment where the exiled prince and the defiant healer would face the full, dangerous cost of their undeniable secret bond. Their undeniable secret bond. Chapter 11. The Hidden Path and the Shadow Prince. The Price of Truth. The stone alcove clicked shut behind Caspian. He emerged into the firelight, still cloaked, still shadowed, still the monstrous shadow prisoner. But to Seraphina, he was no longer a monster. He was Crown Prince Kaelen, a king in waiting, and a master of powerful deceit, the emotional turmoil, betrayal, and fierce, unwavering love was a blinding vortex inside her. Caspian met her gaze, his expression carefully guarded. Yet Seraphina noticed the slight tension in his massive hands, a tell she had come to recognize. He knew she knew. The silence is broken, healer, he stated, his voice a low grate. Tell me what the couriers reported. Seraphina moved slowly, letting the crumpled piece of decoded parchment fall to the cave floor between them. She did not kneel, nor did she raise her voice. Her anger was a cold, cutting edge. They reported that Regent Valerius holds the council in iron, she recited, her voice chillingly calm. They reported that the king is silenced, and they reported that the kingdom awaits the Shadow Prince. She took a breath, letting the full weight of her words sink in. They reported that the shadow curse is a glamour and the chains were symbolic. They reported that you are their heir, Kaelen, and this is your command post. The unveiling Caspian did not flinch, but the immense tension holding his frame together finally broke. He looked away for a painful moment, then back, the raw honesty in his posture an unspoken apology. "It is all true," he confessed, the words thick with shame. "My birthright is ... difficult. The Ash Shadow throne is bound to a power so fierce that it drives men mad. To survive it, I was cursed with an aura of fear, a natural defense meant to push all ambition and all genuine contact away." He looked at her, his voice softening, becoming the Caspian she knew. The glamour, the monstrous disguise was an extra layer. "I chose this self-exile and this identity to find a partner, a mate, who could withstand that primal terror. Someone who would choose compassion over fear, not because of my title, but despite my reputation." He gestured to the spot where her hand had first rested on his arm. "Your echo touch, Seraphina. It is the only thing in the world that felt my soul's truth, the stillness, and was not corrupted by my power. It was the sign I had waited for, the sign of a true mate." The royal sanctuary, the confession was devastating, yet it held the deep, romantic truth that had originally drawn her. He hadn't just tested her. He had needed her. Seraphine's hand flew to her chest, where the mating bond, now that the lie was exposed, was pulsing with an intense, complicated warmth. "You let me believe I was bound to a condemned criminal. You let me live in poverty and fear. And you stayed," Caspian countered, his tone regaining its royal gravity. "You stayed, you protected me, and you loved me. A true queen does not flee a beggar when he is poor." He then moved to the alcove, and this time he did not hide the mechanism. "This is an ancient royal sanctuary," he explained, pointing to the dark passage. "A lifeline meant for the crown in times of civil war. The couriers are my most loyal disguised ministers, and those supplies are coded royal communications." His eyes, the magnificent, gray eyes of a prince, were suddenly serious, focused entirely on the crisis. "The time for secrecy is over, Seraphina. Valerius is consolidating power. He knows the Shadow Prince is still alive, and that I possess the only claim strong enough to raise the legions against him. If he knows you're alive, he will find us." "He already is," Caspian stated grimly. "That message was 3 days old. Valerius's forces are mobilized. Our sanctuary is about to become a battleground. You can be the healer of the temple, and I will ensure your safe passage away from this fight." He offered her a final choice, a heartbreaking echo of her original vow. "You chose me once in defiance. Choose now, Seraphina. Do you flee the war, or do you stand with the Shadow Prince?" Seraphina did not hesitate. The memory of Valerius's icy cruelty, the coldness that had almost broken her, was all the answer she needed. She took a fierce, determined step toward her chained husband. "I choose the man who gave me peace," she stated, her voice ringing with the clarity of a newly forged queen. "I will not run. Show me what I need to heal Prince Kaelen, and I will stand beside my mate." Chapter 12. The glamour revelation, the veil is lifted, the profound emotional reckoning was replaced by cold, strategic clarity. Seraphine's commitment had been firm. She would stand with the man who gave her peace, even if that man was the feared Crown Prince, Kelen. Kelen- no longer just Caspian approached the fire. He reached up, his massive hands grasping the edge of the heavy, shadow-woven cloak and hood he had worn since his exile. With a smooth, decisive motion, he pulled it away. The change was instantaneous and breathtaking. Without the concealing fabric and the mental projection of monster, the shadow glamour that remained was merely an unnerving outline, a faint, rippling haze of dark energy that hid his true face and magnificent physique. "The shadow curse is an inheritance, not a true curse," Kaelen explained, his voice losing the rough edge of the Caspian persona and gaining the deep, resonant timbre of a ruler. "It is the Ash Shadow gift, the power to command the loyal legions, and the ability to absorb and redirect volatile magic. But it is unstable. He stood taller, the sheer aura of power now refined, terrifying, and controlled. The shadow is the mantle of my house. It shields me from the madness the gift often brings, but it creates a primal fear in all sentient beings. It isolates me absolutely. The chains were merely a focusing ritual, a physical anchor to contain that energy and maintain the disguise. The true mates silenced Kaelen, then stepped closer, the faint glamour rippling around him. He gently took Seraphine's hand, resting it on the skin of his now unveiled forearm. "Your echo touch," he said, his gaze intense. "It functions on pain and deceit. My shadow is an absolute defense against both. When you touched me, your curse encountered the ultimate truth, the deepest core of my being, shielded from all external corruption. And what you felt was a null state." He pressed her palm firmly against his arm. "Your soul's frequency, healer, is perfectly aligned with mine. It is the counter-frequency to the shadow gift. You are the only person whose presence does not trigger my power's absolute isolation. That stillness, that peace you felt, it is the mark of the true mate, the destined queen who can anchor the shadow prince and prevent him from succumbing to the inherent madness of the ash shadow throne." His love confession was delivered not with soft words, but with a statement of powerful magical destiny. She was his salvation, scientifically and spiritually. "You chose compassion over fear," Kaelen stated, his thumb tracing a line on her wrist. "You chose the stillness. Now, the quiet we found here must become the core of the war." Preparing for the storm, the brief moment of intimacy ended as Kaelen turned toward the hidden sanctuary. The secret passage now fully open. "We have no time," he said, the commander resurfacing. "The message confirms Valerius is moving fast. He doesn't want me revealed." The ash wraith from the temple. It was not a beast. It was a magically altered shifter, part of Valerius's earliest attempts to discredit the crown and test his ability to generate chaos. Kaelen began retrieving weapons and maps from the sanctuary swords, daggers, and hardened leather armor. "Valerius believes he has driven me mad and kept the kingdom blinded by the shadow prisoner myth. He will send an invasion force, his best troops, to capture me here and silence us both." Kaelen looked at Seraphina, handing her a small, well-balanced dagger. "You will not fight soldiers, but you will need this for self-defense." "Your role is vital." "What is my role?" Seraphina asked, gripping the hilt. "You are the anchor, the healer who can read the truth," Kaelen stated. "We will use this cursed island as our weapon. I will break the chains of the prison, and then I will break the chains of the kingdom. We fight now, Seraphina. We fight for the truth. We fight for the truth." Chapter 13, Valerius's Vengeance. The calm before the storm inside the hidden alcove of the ancient sanctuary. The air was cold, scented with centuries of untouched stone and iron. Prince Kaelen had shed the rough cloak of the shadow prisoner, donning the dark, hardened leather armor of a worthy prince. He was magnificent, tall, powerful, and radiating a controlled intensity that was no longer terrifying, but utterly captivating. The shadow glamour that once screamed monster now only whispered of immense, barely restrained power. Seraphina stood beside him, clutching the dagger he had given her. Her heart hammered, but her mind remained clear, anchored by the unique stillness that emanated from her mate. "Remember your function," Kaelen instructed, his gaze intense. "My power is raw. When the battle begins, you must remain close. You are the only one who can anchor the ash shadow gift and keep my mind focused." "Your calm is our weapon, Seraphina?" "I understand," she confirmed. "The stillness will guide the shadow." Kaelen paused, then reached into a small pouch. He pulled out a piece of sharp, dark bone, barely the size of her thumb, scarred and pitted with burn marks. "This is the true face of the lie," he said, handing it to her. "A remnant from the Ashwraith attack on the temple. Look at it, Seraphina. Read the final moments of that creature." The echo of Conspiracy Seraphina took the bone fragment. The moment her echo touch connected with the relic, the memory flooded her mind, not the creature's pain, but the command that directed it. She saw the scene through the eyes of the magically altered shifter, the fear, the forced transformation, and then the cold, powerful mental instructions being fed into its core. The source of the command was not a rogue curse, but the calculated, chilling psychic signature of Lord Valerius. He hadn't just ignored the Ashwraith attack. He had orchestrated it, testing his ability to use altered shifters to create chaos and discredit the temple. The memory vanished. Seraphina opened her eyes, white-hot fury displacing all fear. "It was him," she whispered, her voice laced with venom. The Ashwraith was a soldier, twisted by his magic and driven by his mind. It was all a deception to break the faith of the temple. "He uses terror as a political weapon," Kaelen agreed, his jaw hard. "He thought I was mad. He thought he had extinguished the only true threat to the throne." He reached out and gently took her hand, squeezing it. "He will learn his error today. He will learn the Shadow Prince found his queen in the most unlikely of places." Vengeance arrived suddenly. The cold, damp air in the cave vibrated. It wasn't the sound of the wind, but a deep, churning thrum, the collective roar of large naval vessels cutting through the waves. Kaelen moved to the cave's narrow mouth, gazing out at the fog-shrouded sea. The mist was beginning to part, revealing a chilling sight. 3 powerful, black-sailed galleons bearing the cruel, serpentine banner of Duke Valerius approaching the shore. They were not couriers. They were an invasion force, bristling with hardened siege troops. "He does not intend to capture us," Kaelen stated, his voice tight. "He intends to ensure our absolute silence." The sound of horns loud, military, and arrogant shattered the stillness of the isle. They had arrived. The chains shattered. Kaelen looked down at the massive iron chains that still connected his wrists and ankles to the central pillar. The ritualistic chains that had contained the shadow and maintained the Caspian persona were now merely a nuisance, an impediment to the full flow of the Ash Shadow gift. He looked at Seraphina one last time, his gray eyes blazing with a mixture of royal determination and deep affection. "Stay anchored, healer," he commanded. "The prince is about to break his chains." With a powerful, inhuman grunt, Kaelen shifted his weight, pulling against the iron links. The ancient metal, which had held him fast for months, screamed under the sudden, immense magical and physical force of the unleashed shadow. The clang was deafening. With a final, agonizing tear, the massive iron chain snapped, showering the cave floor with jagged, useless metal. Kaelen stood free. The shadow glamour around him intensified, turning him into a breathtaking, terrifying manifestation of the royal power Valerius feared most. "Let the war for the truth begin," Prince Kaelen stated, striding toward the hidden exit of the sanctuary to meet the Duke's forces on the shore. Chapter 14. Prince Kaelen unleashed the Shadow Command. The roar of the advancing galleons and the harsh cadence of the Duke's military horns shattered the silence of the isle. Prince Kaelen, free from his heavy chains, was an imposing figure in his dark leather armor. The Ash Shadow gift pulsed around him, making the air crackle with latent energy. "Stay here, Seraphina," Kaelen commanded, his voice deep and urgent. "Do not follow until the wave crests." He vanished through the hidden sanctuary passage, emerging seconds later onto the exposed basalt shoreline. The invasion forced 2 companies of Lord Valerius's elite, serpentine-bannered troops, were already swarming the rocks. Led by a ruthless captain in blackened steel, Kaelen strode forward, still wreathed in the deep shadow glamour that cast him as the monstrous shadow prisoner. "Retreat!" Kaelen's voice thundered, enhanced by the raw power of the shadow. This island is death. Turn back, soldiers of the crown. The captain sneered. The beggar chooses his final words. We capture the prisoner and kill the healer. Duke Valerius demands silence. The troops charged. Kaelen did not draw his sword. Instead, he unleashed the Ash Shadow gift. A wave of palpable coldness emanated from him, thick with the primal dread his power naturally provoked. The soldiers, expecting a physical fight, were hit by an invisible, crippling psychic terror. Weapons clattered to the rocks. The troops froze, their bodies locked by sheer, debilitating fear, their minds overwhelmed by the aura of the monster. The anchor-hold skeleton seized the opportunity, his movements liquid and lethal. He disarmed the front rank, using the shadow's force to twist the steel from their grips. But the release of raw power was too great. Inside the cave, Seraphina felt the sudden, agonizing psychic feedback, not her pain, but Kaelen's. The power, unfiltered by the chains, was beginning to push him toward the edge of control. Too much madness. Fragments of his own fear lashed out through the bond. Knowing the time for caution was over, Seraphina sprinted through the secret passage. She found Kaelen standing amid frozen soldiers, his body rigid, the shadow glamour violently unstable, threatening to tear apart the minds of the men who were now collapsing into catatonia. She rushed to him, ignoring the residual shadow, and slammed her body against his back. Wrapping her arms tightly around his waist, the effect was instantaneous. The agonizing feedback vanished. The wild, raw power flooding his system met the perfect counterfrequency of her stillness. The chaos muted. The crippling terror stopped, leaving the soldiers merely stunned. Kaelen shuddered, his immense body relaxing against her. Seraphina, he grated out. You are reckless. I am your anchor, she corrected, her voice firm. You are losing control. The time for deceit is over, Prince. In the fight, show them the truth. The Shadow Prince, Reveillet Kaelen, understood. This battle was not for his survival, but for the soul of the kingdom. He needed to win not just the ground, but the allegiance of these men. Proving Valerius was the true usurper, he turned, facing the captain and the recovering soldiers. He raised his hands, focusing the Ash Shadow gift not on fear, but on pure, magnificent power. Seraphina, he commanded, his eyes locking onto hers. Hold fast. With a final, conscious push of his royal will, Kaelen shattered the glamour. The monstrous shadow that had defined him for months melted away. Dissolving like smoke in the sea air, in its place stood the Crown Prince Kaelen, his face noble and perfectly sculpted, his hair dark, his magnificent body clad in the royal war leather. He was devastatingly handsome, radiating power and light, the subtle, remaining shadow only serving as a regal, intimidating aura. A collective gasp went up from the surviving soldiers. The captain, who had been struggling to rise, stared, his jaw slack. The Shadow Prince, he whispered, recognition and absolute shock warring in his eyes. I am Kaelen, the prince confirmed, his voice now ringing with undisputed authority. He pointed to the serpentine banner of the Duke. You serve a traitor who tried to murder his king and destroy the temple with lies. The captain, seeing the prince thought to be a myth standing rail and commanding before him, dropped his sword. The remaining soldiers, who had heard the legends of their true prince, immediately fell to one knee. The political victory was achieved. Kaelen had broken the chains, broken the lie, and won the loyalty of the first of Valerius's forces. He looked at Seraphina, the woman who had loved the monster and now anchored the prince. His gray eyes filled with raw tenderness. The island was theirs, but the emotional battle was just beginning. Chapter 15. Confession and Coronation, the Aftermath of the Reveal. The battlefield was silent, save for the roar of the sea. Prince Kaelen stood magnificent and free, his power now a mantle of sovereignty, not a cloak of fear. The defeated soldiers of Valeria's, now kneeling subjects, watched in awe. Seraphina remained rooted to his side, her arms finally releasing him, her presence stilling the raw intensity of the ash shadow gift. The immediate political crisis was handled. Kaelen gave swift, quiet orders to the captain: secure the galleons, restrain the remaining officers, and prepare for immediate return to the capital to rally the loyal legions. But Kaelen's attention was solely on the woman beside him. He dismissed the soldiers, and the two were finally alone amidst the wreckage of their prison and the triumph of their shared destiny. Seraphine's anger, held captive by the necessity of survival, finally broke free. She raised her hand, not to strike, but to press her palm against the bare skin of his cheek. Her echo touch flaring to its fullest capacity, the confrontation and the projected truth. She did not seek his thoughts. She projected her own. She focused the full force of her curse, aiming the torrent of her emotions directly at him through the mating bond, the betrayal, the fear, the crushing disappointment of having loved a deliberate lie, and beneath it all, the fierce, blinding, undeniable love for the man she knew as Caspian. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice cracking with the emotional torrent. "You knew what I was. You knew my curse was isolation, and you used the only peace I had ever found as a test." Kaelen Prince, king-in-waiting, and her mate did not recoil from the psychic surge. He leaned into the painful honesty of the bond, tears welling in his gray eyes. The very image of the frightened man she had chosen on the altar. "Every word is true. Seraphina," he confessed, his voice a low, ravaged sound. "My life was a constant barrage of sycophants and those who wanted the shadow, not the man. My power is too great for a partner I could not fully trust. My curse, my shadow, was a prison I created to find one thing: a soul who was truly selfless." He captured her hand, pressing it over his wildly beating heart. "I wanted someone to see the man who was terrified of his own power. Someone who would choose the beggar over the duke. Someone who would choose a cursed, nameless man over security and wealth." The king's confession Kaelen knelt before her, heedless of the armored soldiers watching from a distance, heedless of his newly regained royal dignity. "When you chose compassion, when your touch brought me silence, it confirmed the prophecy. You were my destined anchor, the only soul who could prevent the ash shadow gift from consuming me," he pleaded. "The deception was a terrible means to a necessary end. Forgive the prince, my love, for what the king had to do to find his queen." Seraphina looked down at the future ruler of the Sunstone Kingdom, the man who had traded his crown for chains, who had endured exile to find genuine love. She looked at the man whose deception had ultimately forced her to rely on her own strength and find peace in her own heart. Free from the constant noise of the world, her anger vanished, leaving only a profound, crystalline certainty. She realized that by loving the man beneath the monster, she hadn't just saved him. She had healed herself. "I forgive you, Kaelen," she affirmed, pulling him up to his feet. "But the lies end now. We rule in truth, or not at all." The new dawn weeks later. Duke Valerius's tyranny had crumbled, his few loyalists dispersed by the sight of the resurrected, legitimate shadow prince, and the rallying of the loyal legions. The true king, found imprisoned and ailing, abdicated in favor of his powerful son. The coronation was held not in the cold, oppressive grandeur of the old capital, but in the newly cleansed, sun-drenched halls of the royal palace. Prince Kaelen and Seraphina stood side by side. The bishop placed the ancient ash shadow crown upon Kaelen's head. Then the bishop turned to Seraphina. The former echo-touched healer dot as the queen's diadem was placed upon her brow. A final transformation occurred. The echo touch, once a curse that amplified the world's pain, now settled into a gentle, controlled presence. Having found her anchor, Seraphine's gift was no longer a torment. It was a perfect tool for empathy and understanding, allowing her to perceive the true needs of her people without being consumed by their suffering. She was the queen of truth. Choa and King Kaelen met her eyes across the cheering court. His magnificent face, once masked by a terrifying glamour, was now open, honest, and filled only with love. The Shadow Prince had found his queen, and the healer had found her peace, ushering in a new era where compassion and truth, forged in the depths of exile, would finally rule the Sunstone Kingdom. Chapter 16, The Silence of the Throne, Epilogue. The price of a crown, the royal palace, was a study in excess, a stark contrast to the small, damp sea cave that had been their home. 3 months into their reign, Queen Seraphina was thriving, using her perfected echo touch as a tool for governance, sensing the true needs of her people past the courtiers' lies, but the palace still held 1,000 different echoes. Tonight, following a grueling state dinner, the noise of court intrigue, the endless stream of ambition, gossip, and calculated flattery had left her mind buzzing. Even controlled, the flow of mental energy was exhausting. Seraphina slipped away from the receiving line and headed directly for King Kaelen's private solar, the only room in the entire massive palace where the constant din truly faded. She found him exactly where she expected, seated at a massive, ornate obsidian desk, surrounded by maps and documents. The residual ash shadow gift pulsing around him, keeping the room pleasantly, magically cool. Kaelen, no longer the stoic Caspian, but still the man who gave her peace, looked up, a slight, weary smile softening the sharp angles of his face. He rose instantly, circling the desk. "Trouble, my queen?" he asked, his deep voice carrying the resonance of command, yet gentle for her ears alone. "The Countess of Varane is planning to poison the Duke of Torian's goldfish, and I simply cannot filter that level of pettiness anymore." Seraphina sighed, collapsing into the nearest velvet chair. "The sheer volume of deceit here is deafening, Kaelen. I miss the simple honesty of the Isle. I miss the chains." A glimpse of the beggar Kaelen laughed, a rare, rich sound that shook the quiet room. He had not lost his quiet humor, though his bearing was now undeniably that of a magnificent king. "Do not let the royal steward hear you express longing for the iron," he chuckled. He walked over to her and knelt down, his dark royal attire contrasting with the light of her dress. He was still enormous, still radiating immense power, but he wore it now with ease. He gently took her hands, his thumb tracing the soft skin of her palm. "Close your eyes, Seraphina. Let the shadow absorb the noise." As their skin connected, the familiar, perfect stillness settled over her mind, washing away the echoes of the court like a tide. It was their silent ritual, the unique power of the true mate bond. She was his anchor in power. He was her silence in the storm. "Do you ever miss the cave?" she murmured, her eyes still closed, enjoying the profound rest. "Every dawn," Kaelen admitted, his voice rough with genuine sentiment. "That cave taught me what freedom truly was. It taught me that my greatest strength was not my power, but your presence. We were kings even then, my love, just disguised as a beggar and a prisoner." He leaned in, his lips finding hers in a slow, deep kiss. For a moment, the world of crowns and treachery vanished, and they were back on the basalt rocks, bound by fate and fire. The anchor of the rain, when the kiss broke, Seraphine's eyes were clear and bright. The court's chatter was a distant, controllable hum. "I need you close tonight, healer," Kaelen confessed, rising and pulling her to her feet, his massive hand settling on her hip. "Tomorrow, we sign the new Charter of Empathy, and I need to ensure the truth of the decree is pure. I need your perspective." Seraphina smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then I will sleep in the shadow of the king, just as I slept in the shadow of the prisoner. Kaelen led her toward their private apartments. As they walked, he looked down at her, his eyes soft with a promise. "We have broken the chains of the past, Seraphina," he said. "The kingdom believes in power, but our reign will be built on the strength of our truth, the strength that chose compassion over fear and silence over comfort." They reached the door. Kaelen paused, looking back at the echoing, empty hallway of the palace. He leaned in and delivered one last gentle kiss to her forehead. "You may have chosen the monster, my queen," he whispered, "but I found my salvation and my stillness." With that, King Kaelen and Queen Seraphina stepped into the royal suite, the door clicking softly shut behind them, leaving the noisy, complicated world of the court to the beautiful, absolute peace of their love.